Hey guys, theotherdmnamedmatt here, and today we're going to be doing another terrain tutorial, but before we get started there's just a couple things to point out. First, you may have noticed the cool logo and intro that accompanied this video, and I want to thank Take20D&D and Shanorific for that. Their Twitter handles will be in the description down below. But on top of that, I have started a Patreon, and with this comes a more regular upload schedule, and I'm hoping to at least consistently release something once a month at minimum, and then bonus content for Patreon subscribers. So if you guys are interested in supporting the channel and my Twitter and my crafts and all that kind of cool stuff, feel free to check it out. But now, let's get started. Today we're going to be making aerial platforms to take your D&D from 2D to 3D. We all know how annoying it is during combat to try to visualize when a player is flying or when an enemy is flying, and the distances and who's within range of what spell and who's within range of arrows and blah 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 blah. And these are going to help you visualize all that in a more appealing way. There are products like this that exist, and they are reasonably priced. That being said, we'll be able to create them for much less than a lot of the stores will charge, and I apologize because I do know some of my friends on Twitter do sell these, so I'm not trying to undercut you. Much love, Axe and Shield. This is inspired by a friend of mine on Twitter named Anne. Her tag is KJRE, and I'm gonna butcher that even though she sent me the phonetic pronunciation, but here's a photo of hers, and yeah, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing you guys are going to need is a utility knife, and I know this is world building on a budget, but please don't cheap out on these. The safer the better. Next, you're going to need some paper, white or lined, doesn't matter, it's not too important. After that, a hot glue gun, and with these I need you to try and find the one with the smallest nozzle you can. If you have a larger nozzle, it's okay. The smaller the better, because we're going to be doing a little more detailed work. After that, you're going to need a straight edge or a carpenter's square. I prefer the carpenter's square, but for this project it doesn't really matter. Next, you're going to need some of these cosmetic sample containers. Now you can get these at a few different places like craft stores or Amazon. That's where I got these, and basically what they are little screw-on cylindrical containers. I will leave a link in the description down below to these ones if you want to buy the same ones I did. Now, a few other things that might be helpful to you would be a fine tip Sharpie, a pen, a roll of masking tape, or any other tape that's not going to leave behind a lot of adhesive, and a pair of snips. Now the last thing you're going to need is a sheet of 3mm or 2mm thick acrylic, otherwise known as plexiglass, and you can get this cut at the shop, or you can do what I did and just get a square about 1 foot by 1 foot. As you can see, I've cut it down a little bit, and this is because I've already made a couple of these aerial platforms, and this is just the final one I need, so this is 1/3 of the original material. So now if we add all that up and we take a look, the final price for one of those 3 stack platforms that you saw at the beginning of the video is going to come to about $12 US if you need the tools and everything else, and only about $7 US if you only need the materials. Now these are rough estimates, prices may vary where you're from, but dollar stores are a great resource, so please make use of them. First things first, we're going to take our plexiglass, go along the length of it, and mark every 3 3/4 inches. Now this depends on what kind of grid system you run. I run a 1 1/4 inch grid. A lot of my friends run a 1-inch grid, so basically you can base that on whatever the dimensions of a 3x3 area would be in your system. Alright, now just take your Sharpie and mark those out on either side, trying to make sure that they are even with each other in case your square of plexiglass wasn't perfectly square. Then take your utility knife and give yourself a little bit of length. I probably did a little bit too much here, but just be safe. Line up your straight edge and just start scoring away at the plexiglass, trying to create a deep groove in the glass itself without cracking or breaking it. This stuff is pretty durable, so it would be hard to create any sort of spider effect or splintering, but just make sure to take your time and be careful, and once you have a groove going, you can even take the ruler away. Just be very slow and sturdy with how you're pressing down. You don't want it to slip and scratch the glass, or even worse, cut yourself or scratch yourself. I don't want to be responsible for any of you getting hurt, so some of you younger DMs may want to ask a parent or guardian to help you out. Alright, once you feel like you have a deep enough score, and please watch the video all the way to the end before you attempt this, because wrecking this piece of plexiglass now would definitely set the project back in cost and time. So just make sure you have a deep score, and then we can move on to the next step. Alright, so take your plexiglass now to the edge of a very solid table. I opted for something that wasn't my crafting table as I didn't want to jostle the camera, and now you get to see my messy laundry room. But line up the edge with the very, very tip of the table and just plant one hand on the long piece of plexiglass, like so, and just press really hard on the other piece, and it should snap cleanly off if you score deep enough. Then just do it one more time to separate the other two pieces. And there you go. Alright, now that we're back at the table, you can peel off that nasty blue plastic. It's better to keep it on while you're carving just so it doesn't scratch the glass or slip as much, because you have that extra surface there protecting it. But now that we're done cutting and carving into the glass, we can take it off. And now just keep an eye out on the edges for any burrs or any extra pieces of plastic that kind of stuck on. Any of the blue stuff will be hard to get off at this point because it is staticky, so just keep an eye out for that. Now this one piece has quite a large burr sticking out of the side, and that is because the previous use I had for the plexiglass didn't cut quite as cleanly and resulted in this large spike sticking out of the side. So this didn't take a chunk out of any of my other tiles, so it's no big deal, but we are going to have to get rid of that, and that's where your snips are going to come in handy. Just make sure you run them as cleanly along the edge as you can, just so you don't create any divots or any variability. And you could sand this as well, just make sure you do it in a very well ventilated area with a respirator. Alright, so now that all of our components are prepared, we can start to assemble this thing, and you're going to want to separate most of your makeup containers top and bottoms, because the way they're going to be used, not a lot of them are going to be screwed together by the time we're done with this. So for our base tile, we're going to take the bottom of one of the makeup containers and glue it on the dead center facing upwards. For our middle tile, we're going to put the top of one on the bottom of the tile and the bottom of one on the top of the tile, and keep them very centered because this can throw off the entire skew of your tower. And for the final one, we're going to put the top of a makeup container on the bottom of a piece of plexiglass. Alright, now make sure you have one of each of these types of parts, because without them, you're not going to have a complete tower. So now you need to take your piece of paper and your tiles, and what we're going to be doing is finding the center point. Now this can be a little difficult, but if you use this technique, it's doable and not as tricky as it seems. So do yourself a favor and outline the tiles on the piece of paper. This will allow you to measure each of the sides and just find the center point. Keep the tile oriented the same way it's traced on the paper so you know which side matches which, because as try as we might, these aren't going to be perfectly square. No matter what we do, cutting plexiglass with a utility knife is never going to be perfect. Take your time and find the midpoint of each side. It's better to measure twice and cut once. Alright, now that you've found your midpoints, draw a line from each of them to create an X in the middle, and then take your piece of plexiglass and tape it down in the same orientation it was before. Again, this will allow for the closest to center we can get with these uneven tiles. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom of our makeup container, because this is going to be the base of our tower, and glue it as dead center as we can get. Now a lot of these makeup containers come with a little dimple in the center of them, which will really help you line this up, but if they don't, do your best to eyeball it, because the closer you get to centered, the more even your tower is going to be when complete. Now we're going to do the same for the other two tiles, making sure that our sides are oriented, making sure we have the midpoints, and doing as best as we can is to glue these pieces dead center. For our middle tile, we're going to start with the same technique, and we're just going to be gluing the bottom onto the top of the plexiglass, and this will help us center everything and allow for the best possible fit. And then after that, we're going to take the top and glue it to the bottom of the plexiglass, using our fingers to kind of line it up as best we can and get that perfect symmetrical fit. And finally, for the last tile, you're just going to take the top of one of the makeup containers and glue it dead center. That way it'll be a perfect cap for our tower. Alright, you can separate them from the paper now, and as you see with one of the tiles here, the glue job wasn't perfect. And the more glue you can use on these, the better, because they will come apart pretty easily, especially if you're using cheaper glue. You can use resin, but that is a little more expensive. And again, this is world building on a budget, and we try to keep the cost as low as possible. So basically just double check these once they come off the paper and give them a little twist, a little pull, just to make sure that they're secure. And if they do start to loosen, pull it off. It won't damage the plexiglass. That way, you know they're going to hold up for game day. Now, for the final step of this project, you're going to want to wait until you have all your tiles made. This includes if you're making multiple sets, anything like that, because we're going to use the rest of your makeup containers to make the connectors that go between the tiles and allow you to adjust the height. And how you do that is you just unscrew the top from the bottom, flip them over, and glue them back to back. You're going to want to, again, use a lot of glue for this to make sure they don't twist off during use. I had a couple do that right before the game, so I was able to fix them in time, thankfully, but it's better if you can just avoid this situation altogether. Now all that's left to do is assemble. And we're done. If you guys have any questions or had trouble following along, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at theotherdmnamedmatt.